Thank you for joining me, Eliot, for this session. I am extremely happy to be talking about this book with you, which I read it in 3 days. I'm not a fast reader, and I flew through this book mostly at night, and it was such a well thought out, very, very gripping tale of these two boys. Um, so on that note, could you first tell us a little about yourself and your love for sci-fi?
Sure, yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. I really loved you presented your reactions to the book as you were reading it, and it was great to hear from you and talk about it. And I know
Right.
from months ago you saw the cover and were like, "I'm going to read that book." So it's great to finally be chatting about it. But yeah, I've always been a very, I guess my sort of theme as a writer has been to like combine science and
Right.
storytelling. Previously, I was writing about animals and about the environment and nature. But now I've kind of gone 400 years in the future and I'm writing about outer space,
Right.
which is always a passion of mine, but I never actually wrote about it. But I really like the idea of the experience of reading a book when you're also learning something about how the world works. So it was really
Right.
fun looking at like how spaceships like might feasibly work in 400 years from now and what travel over long distances across the universe would look like.
Look like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, I just asked this question, but I'll have to ask it again. I have a best friend, and we were discussing about you when I started reading this book, and she was the first person who was getting the live reactions, and she was the one who went ahead and she did a little bit of research on you, and she's like, man, Elliot looks exactly the same as he did 10 years ago. Like what is he doing? Is he a human? Is he from Earth? Or like his stories, is he also, some sort of a different species? So what could
That's
you
right.
share on that? Like, what is your secret behind staying young?
Well, I would say first of all, I do need to get new author photos. So the the author photo on the book is actually a few years old, but also moisturizing.
Moisturizing.
I spend a lot of time inside. I don't really go into the sun, and that is the key.
Okay, okay. I will be sure to pass that information around. Could you quickly, go over the synopsis for this book and tell us what can the readers who still haven't picked up this book or don't know about it can potentially expect, and why should they be picking this up?
Sure. Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, so Darkness Outside is a little bit tricky to talk about, as you know, because
Yeah,
you got into the second half, and someday we'll do like a special password only session where people can log in if they've already finished, so can actually
right,
really get into it.
right,
But the story takes place 400 years in the future, and Earth is locked into a cold war between only two remaining nations, and
right,
they are at war with each other. But together, they do send one young astronaut to settle one of the moons of Saturn. Her name is Minerva,
right,
and she's the hope of Earth. And everyone might come together and rally about this idea of settling a new planet. But she goes dark. Her base stops sending signals, and everyone has to mourn her death. And 2 years later, a distress beacon trips on the moon, and they have to scramble out a ship to go save her if she's still alive. And so neither country can afford to send a ship on its own. So they have to scramble out a joint mission with these two boys, one
right,
from each of the nine countries. And
right,
so they're on board the ship, and they quickly discover that there's not
yeah.
everything is as they would have expected. There are damages to the ship, strange damages. It looks like someone has been on board, and the operating system is being a little bit cagey with them and not really revealing what it's really thinking. So they know immediately that there's more to their mission than they've been told.
Right, right. Very, very, very well put. I don't know how you've managed to not give away spoilers and yet. I think I think that came with practice.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I'm sure I actually have spoiled the book quite a few times in interviews. I just haven't realized it because it's
right,
really hard to know what you know.
right, because I think with this book, even the smallest of element is potentially like a big spoiler because that's just how you've set it up. And so actually my next question is partly about the writing process that this book had, because I know some authors, they like to, plot every chapter as they go ahead. And considering the fact that this book doesn't really have chapters, I mean, it has tasks remaining, which I'm assuming is something like chapters, but not exactly replacing the chapters. So how did you approach it? Like, did you have like a very detailed plan? Okay, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, or were you more like a pantser? You went along the way.
No, I'm too much of a control freak to be a pantser. I'm definitely a plotter. And I wrote a 10-page single-space outline that actually it was much more elaborate than I've ever done before. It was like part by part, exactly what was going to happen out in the scenes.
Right.
Because among other things, Darkness Outside Us is like my love letter to plot twists.
Right.
And I love the experience of watching a movie or reading a book and everything changes. And
Yeah.
like you
Yeah,
should have seen it coming, but you didn't. Yeah, exactly. I'm sure you can add some visual effect when you put it.
Yeah.
But in order to pull that off, it takes a lot of planning because the reader has to be able to start over if they finish the book and see the seeds for the plot twist. Otherwise, it's like random. It's you
Right.
can't just have a ordinary story and suddenly aliens land or something. Like it doesn't make sense, right?
Right.
So I needed to plan a lot to make sure that twist would work out, and that the story leading up to it was compelling enough that readers would stick with it, and then also enjoy the story that would come after this big reveal.
Right. Right.
It was like I think of two equally compelling novels and then join them together in a way, right? Because if either half doesn't work, then the reader is going to be dissatisfied.
I would say you'd have to think about 6 because there are technically 6 parts. so it's like 6 stories, 6 novellas put into one and combined into one.
Right. One of which is very short. It's more like flash fiction.
Yeah.
But yeah, you got me, Giles, too. But you asked about the tasks part and not having chapters, and I've actually some readers are upset because when you read a book, at night especially, you like look forward to see how long the chapter is, and you can go to bed and get to the end of the chapter. And we don't have chapters, so people will read and read, hoping to finish the chapter and go to bed, and then they can't go to bed because they have to keep reading. So I realize I've caused people some problems. But the reason I wanted to do that was on a ship, there's no morning and there's no dusk. So there's no beginning and end to the day.
Right.
And so all of life is kind of timeless. Like it's just existing in one unbroken space of time. And the book is really interested in time and how time works. And so the idea of not having chapters seemed to kind of fit the way of these boys' emotional experience of the ship was. It wasn't broken. It was only broken by doing these like to-do list tasks, which seemed really useless to them, and they don't realize how essential they are to their own survival until later.
Right. No, it's very interesting you mentioned that, because I remember when I started the book, even I was pretty much expecting, it came to me and I was just looking through it like this, and I was like, where are the chapters? And I'm like, oh, there are no chapters, there are parts. And then I realized, okay, the parts, the first part is really big, so I need to really read a lot of pages before I keep the book down. So I can agree, but I think it's something which most readers will forgive you for. I mean, you have won their hearts in that respect.
Well, if they see a purpose to it, then hopefully they'll forgive me. I know some will probably never.
Some will, yeah. Some readers have that, they want everything very traditional. So
Did you read part 1 in one sitting? You read part 1 all at one time?
Right.
Wow.
I read part 1 at one time, and then I remember I distinctly remember when I started part 2, I was not sure what happened, because quick fact about me, I don't read sci-fis. Okay, like sci-fi is not my preferred genre, because one, it has a lot of physics and science into it, and my mind is very small to understand all of those complicated mechanics and just the whole world of it. So I tend to stay away from sci-fis. And but then this one I had to pick up, and I knew that this would be different. So I was very happy that I think I mentioned it in my review as well. This book was not very heavily packed with unnecessary information about the spaceship, or things which aren't really directly related to the story moving forward. So I think that just helped me fly through the pages, and I was like, oh, I'm gripped to this. So when the second part started, I was confused for at least 10 pages. I'm like, wait, did I just not read this? Okay, I can't say it out loud because it would be a spoiler, but I was confused. And it took me a while to figure out what happened. And then once I did, that was the time when the boom just stepped in. And I was like, shit, this is what happened. And I think after that, I just did not wanted to keep the book down, like because when you're reading the first chapter, you're sort of heading in this zone where where you're expecting things to work out in certain ways. But once you drop that whole bomb after the first part ends and the second one starts, the reader is legitimately very confused as to what can happen next. And I, for that matter, I knew how many parts were there, so I was already trying to figure out. um so yeah, but would you like to say something on that? Yeah.
Yeah, it must be a different experience for people reading an e-reader version of this, an ebook,
Yeah.
because then you don't know that there are parts, and so
Right.
you're a little bit more like the boys are on the ship. Like you don't know
Right.
what's coming.
What's
in the
coming
future.
next?
Whereas with a paper edition, like you see, like there's a like sort of dark lines where
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
art
Yeah.
is a dark pink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So I do realize people flipping through will get spoiler information just by looking at those dark pages because it
right.
reveals the structure of the book.
Structure this.
So
Yeah, and that's true because I just recently read Sean David Hutchinson's a very complicated love story set in space. And I think it's a little similar, in the way the story is set up, with characters having, the kind of way that yours has. And I was listening it on audiobook, and I was very confused. Okay, what is happening? Like, it's saying chapter one, but but on my Scribd it's showing some different chapters. I was like, okay, this is very confusing, and I might have to just physically pick it up. So yeah, I can understand
yeah,
it can be a little challenging for readers who prefer audio/digital.
yeah, it was really amazing that Sean's book came out in April, I think,
Yeah.
and mine came out in June. And really, on the surface, when I heard about his book, I was worried because like, his book is also about two boys who wake up on a spaceship with not
Yeah.
knowing why they're there.
Yeah.
And that was so weird that it was so similar. So I read his book as soon as I could, and I
Yeah.
realized, oh, we are going
Very
totally
different.
different
Yeah.
directions. Like
Yeah, I
with
think.
like style wise, everything. I love his book, but it's like a very different mood and tone, and the boys
Yeah.
are very different.
Yeah,
So I was like,
it's interesting to note because Sean has had this history. Like it happened with you. Before this, it happened with his book called The State of Us, where it was said to be very similar to Casey McQuiston's Red, White, and Royal Blue. But anyway, so yeah, so going back and sharing a very quick personal story with you. So when I was in the 8th grade in my school, I was always a student who used to, in my lunchtime, I used to be in the library and, digging inside a book. And I came across this book which had an orangutan on its cover, okay, and it's called Endangered. And and I picked it up, okay. I remember reading it. I had no clue who the author is, and back then I did not care about authors. Like unlike today, the world I think has moved from being a space where they care only about books versus people care more about the authors versus their books.
mm,
Once I read this book and I was preparing for this interview, I was going back and looking at what you have done so far, and I was shocked because it just then hit me that I had read your book. And
that's amazing.
yeah, and as a 14-year-old, it really, like it touched me in certain ways. And it reminded me a lot of Rise of the Planet of Apes, or I think something of that sort. The movie came out very back then, and it was very interesting. So back then I never knew that I'd ever get a chance to speak with you someday live. So I'm very, very fortunate about that. But my question to you is that you've written so many books, and most of them have been aimed mostly towards a younger audience, like middle graders, children. And this is probably, if I'm right, your first YA official YA novel. So which one do you think, did you enjoy writing more, and like what can we expect in the future? Like where are you
Yeah.
going? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an amazing story, and I'm so glad that you read In Danger. I wish we could go back and talk to the younger you. Yeah, let
Yeah,
him know.
yeah, it's insane because another very quick thing before you continue. So I remember back then, pronunciation is always difficult for certain words, and I remember your surname is a little bit difficult depending on where you are from. And I remember I read that book and I told my friend, you have to read this book. It's about this orangutan. And I know it was not an orangutan, it was like an ape. Like, you have to read this book. This happens here. And he's like, okay, tell me the author. And I'm like, Eliot something. I don't know. Eliot something. So I have very distinct memories, but then, I was very young, did not have access to internet. So I never looked you up. But I was shocked, it felt like a complete circle in certain ways where was sort of connected back with my childhood, and it's insane because you were a part of my childhood. So yeah.
That's great. It's yeah, we actually just recorded a radio advertisement for Darkness Outside Us, and there's a radio announcer who talks about the book, and he pronounced my name so many different ways. Every time they send the file, we had to send it back and say, no, it's actually not Schrefer or Schrefer.
Schrefer. Yeah, okay.
Schrefer is so weird, and there's letters missing, and I really don't care. People say my name. But Endangered was actually officially YA, even though it was read by middle schoolers. So it was read by 7th and 8th graders a lot. So.
Right. I was in 8th grade. Yeah, that's the right age for that book.
Okay. It's just there's so much. It takes place during war in Congo, so there's so much violence in it.
Yeah.
5th and 6th graders couldn't read it, which they're also middle grade.
Yeah.
But this is definitely my oldest YA book that I've written. It's also the only one I've written with a romance in it at all. It's my first book with any romance. And I think I was trying to figure out why that is, like why I waited until now, and also why this book needed it. And I was raised by, my mom is English, and English people, they don't talk about feelings. So, like, I felt like writing about romance and love was like, you should keep that in the home. Like, it's not for books. Like, books should be about other things. And so I think I was probably repressed, and like I wasn't willing to write about actual heart things, So I finally, maybe it was years of marriage or years of therapy, I finally was ready to write this book. But I also, it seems the book is about only 2 people on the ship, and it just seemed so right that they would also be like romantic connection would be part of their coming together. And it was interesting when I proposed the book to my publisher, HarperCollins, I was ready for them to say, we're really excited about the space journey, and we want this idea of 2 astronauts on a mysterious voyage, but does it have to be 2 boys? Like, could it be a boy and a girl? And it was not at all. That's not the way it worked. They were so excited about the fact that it was 2 boys, and then they were like, "Sci-fi doesn't really sell. Like, people don't really love, spaceships." So
young
like,
adult,
you write about,
specifically young adult people don't seem to vibe very well with sci-fi. Yeah.
I always think with young adult, everyone wants to know, like, what's the next big thing, and I think usually the next big thing is unlike whatever's come before it. So it's like a sort of high risk thing to write a book that is not currently in the trend for YA. There's a very good chance no one will read it, but if it breaks through, it'll be like it hasn't existed before, so everyone wants to read it. So it's like you lower your chances of having middle success with a book, but if it does succeed, you could really break out.
So. Yeah. So so on that note, do you personally read romance books? Like, and what are your favorites?
I don't read a lot of romance, but I did love Red, White, and Royal Blue.
Oh, everybody loves that book. Yeah.
That's not a unique take. I just finished The House in the Cerulean Sea by T. Bloom. It's hard to. That's a very English romance. So it's like it's sort of a romance, but
it's
like
not exactly a romance.
Looking at each other. But let's see. When I was a teenager, I read a book called The God in Flight by Laura Arditi. That's an adult novel, and it's a historical gay romance between like a young student at Yale in the 19th century and his professor. And it was. I found it so romantic and fascinating, and I read that book so many times. That was a really foundational early experience for me. because especially when you're a teenager, you know, if
Teenager,
you're out or you're not in an accepting climate, reading a book can be a really cathartic experience, a way of like
right.
figuring out like what it will be like once I'm in a place where I can be myself.
Right, right. I think I mean, I read a lot of romances, and I think a part of the reason why I read so many romances is because, you know, the clear lack of romance in my own personal life is sort of filled up with book boyfriends and book girlfriends, and you know, so on and so forth. So since, you know, we are speaking about romance, I had this question on my list as well. So you know, a lot of people who might go into this expecting like a rom-com styled, you know, very mushy, adorable sort of a romance might have a little different expectation, considering the fact that when I read it, I saw this book more as a, you know, as a story about survival, and a story about you know, about the future, our collective future of how it's going to be, like as you said, 400 years from now. And of course, while romance is a part of it, romance is in the subplot, and as you said, you know, you're English, so it's sort of repressed. And over the end of the book, it does come out, and you know, it does blossom very well, but it's uniquely different. And a part of reason why I also had, you know, had concerns with the romance was because it's written in this way where we have to first acknowledge that both are boys. They aren't really who we think that they are. So so can these people, and I'm not sure if people is the right word to describe them, and I cannot use the word because that would be a major spoiler.
But you're
So
already flirting with spoiler. Yeah.
yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, I can't discuss this question without getting into this, like, you know, a little bit of spoiler. So I just wanted to know, like, I mean, can these boys feel real emotion? Like, can they feel emotion like us, like humans, and or how are they different?
Oh, wow. This is a really hard one to answer without spoilers. So maybe just if anyone watching this really doesn't like anything spoiled, they can
Yeah,
just
like,
pause,
yeah, for
skip
now,
forward
just
10
pause.
minutes.
Yeah, the moment I'll keep down the book, that is your cue to, you know, to
That's good. A good idea. Good
yeah,
idea. So the way that I'm really just going to go for it.
yeah,
So the way that the boys work as clones
yeah,
is that they have the memories nanoteched into their brains, and they
right.
are raised from the same genetic code. So they are humans. They just weren't from a unique set of parents. Like they're just
Okay.
identical DNA and identical memories. So, but the way their bodies operate, it's not like they're partly bionic or robotic or something.
Right.
They're fully people. So there
Mhm.
is fully no difference between one of the Ambroses and another one. So
Okay.
that's why, and the ship doesn't change. So that's
Right.
why their days on the ship can actually play out so similarly in all the different incarnations that they have.
Incarnation.
That nothing has changed. It's the exact same human, and the exact same setup, and the operating system is saying the exact same thing. So of course, every day would go just like it did before. With obviously each part is different, so there's noticeable changes eventually. But it was a way to playing with that idea of chaos theory, that like
Yeah.
one little small change can cause a huge effect later
The
on.
butterfly effect. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, the butterfly effect. So it was
Right.
a way of tinkering with that too. Like, how can I make them? It takes them a long time to become friends and then romantic partners in the first part.
Hmm.
What could happen in parts 2 through 6 that would speed that along and force them to be more intimate more quickly, and to
Right.
trust each other? So that was something I wanted to explore in the various parts too.
Right. I really liked how you know, in each part they had to fight over, you know, of Kodiak coming to Amberose's quarters, and they having you know, that dish together. I think that was something which was kept constant in all the parts. You know, and I really loved that, so I had to mention it. So
So,
yeah. And now I'm gonna keep the book down because we are done discussing the spoilers.
understood.
Yeah, so done. So my next question, you know, would be about the AI. Now, the AI was such an interesting thing in this book because it's both an element which sort of carries the story forward, but it's also a character, and it's kind of dual. It has a dual personality to it because it serves the purpose of the mother, who at the same time has a personality of its own. So, how did you approach that? Like, you know, what was the idea behind it?
Yeah. So I was inspired by, as I mentioned, I read 2001, and how the
Yeah.
intelligence chip was such a amazing antagonistic force. And so I realized the power of that very early on. But there's also a video game called Portal, where there's an evil AI who's also very funny in her incomprehension of humans. Like, so she's trying to like be empathetic, but she gets it all wrong. And so I liked playing with that for the operating system as well. But it seemed like a missed opportunity for the operating system just to be its own computer intelligence and nothing directly related to the boys. So I had Ambrose's mother. She was the one, the engineer in the company that made it all. So it's her voice most of the time. And so that way, we learn how to be romantically with someone from the models we got as children, right? And we can work to unlearn those, but we still have all the baggage that we hold from the example of our parents or other people around us. So I like the idea of the reminder of where Ambrose came from as he's trying to figure out like, what does it mean to be attached to someone and to love them? Like, and what was the model of love that he grew up with? Like his mother was not around. He was raised basically by a sister and surrogates and, in a very wealthy family. His mother, which, spoiler, his mother like kind of did something really awful to him, right? Like forced his copies to live this life that is terrible and brutal and short, except for one copy. Okay. And so I like the idea of playing with, what if the model you came from isn't a great one and you have to find your own version of romantic connection and being a partner to someone.
Very interesting, because I think I mentioned this before as well. When I was reading the AI, it was such a comic relief factor. At the same time, it had that emotional connect to it. So I was amazed because the AI was serving different sort of like different character roles, Willist being just the one thing, which is serving multiple purposes. Like at one time I was super scared of it. At other time I'm just enjoying these sheer wickedness of it, and then so on and so forth. So now I have a very interesting question for you, and that is that let's say both your boys, that is Ambrose and Kodiak, let's say they figure out that their radio is working, and they have to contact somebody from Earth. So which character or set of characters or one character from which book / movie / comic will they be reaching out to for help, and why?
Oh gosh. This is the kind of question that goes better if I've been like drinking wine during our interview. Very creative question.
This is like Comic Con level question, I think.
Yeah. I think they would wind up. I don't know if you remember the movie Contact with Jodie Foster.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, and Matthew McConaughey, I think, is a preacher, if I remember. Yeah. It's also based on a book by Carl Sagan, but I'm going to imagine. So Jodie Foster spends her time like manning radio telescopes, listening for signs of life in the universe. So I think when these boys reach out back to Earth, that it's Jodie Foster who answers, which I think is pretty great.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Why not? Yeah. Like in my mind.
Run to help him. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think when I saw it, I was thinking more of like the Avengers but then I was like, yeah, no, you guys always save the day, so let's just give the chance to somebody else now. So yeah, it makes sense. Okay, so now this is a question which isn't exactly related to the book. It isn't exactly related to writing, but it's more like a broad-ended, connected sort of a question. So you've written about future, and most of your books have always been forward-looking in a time when most authors choose to work back way because it's more easier. So with COVID around, with people dying here and there, and healthcare collapsing, Israel and Palestine issue happening there, and the nature is giving out its own cries because it's completely overburdened with everything that we have done. A lot of people even argued that COVID is a reminder from the nature that it cannot take human anymore. Like we have overburdened everything, and we have used the resources to an unimaginable extent. So what do you think that the collective future of all our lives look like? And yeah, I know that's a very
Just that.
daunting question to ask an author, but I would still want to know your opinions. Like, do you think a future like the one that you've created can it ever become a real reality in the coming years?
Wow. I'm glad you didn't start with this question. I would not be ready. I feel a little more ready now. I One of the things I love about science fiction is that it gives you a chance to recontextualize our lives and look at it from the outside.
Right.
So by looking at a totally different Earth in a different society, like it's a way of re-looking at the one that we live in, which otherwise, like we're just inside it, so we can't really see it.
Right.
But so I imagined this timeline in the future would be that countries weren't really political boundaries anymore. There were more economic things, like the two countries locked into a war was sort of like all
Right.
mixed together.
Right.
But as far as, you know, our future and the environment, I do think, you know, the world might be better off if there's something that limits human growth, whatever it is. Hopefully it's our better natures,
Our better nature.
and the way to not have more, consume more, and have more sheer numbers.
Right.
Or like COVID is a pretty good example of a course correction that is outside of human control, right?
Right.
That is, you know, caused by the
Yeah.
wildlife and overburdened health systems.
Right.
It's something to really keep in mind. You know, a year ago in New York City, we were like sort of the peak of crisis, and now it feels better here. And now it's India's, you know,
Yeah.
and if it's a crisis, and to think that, you know, a story that's being told and written in some place will be read by people in vastly different circumstances. It's something, it's a really sobering thought for a writer, you know, to remember how many different humans there are in the world and how many different situations they're in as they read something that,
Right.
that should speak to all of them.
Should speak.
So,
No,
yeah.
no, as a reader who's not white, as a reader who's not the same race as these boys, I think I completely related to both of them. Even though, you know, like there isn't very specified, like, you know, this is a person from this representation. And, you know, in today's YA world, I think representation has become like a selling point for a lot of books. And I don't mean that in any negative way. I think representation is very important and we need more representation. But so many authors, you know, these days they try to have representation for the sake of having representations. And of course, while I will not name authors, but but yeah, like sometimes it's very disappointing, you know, when authors don't put in the kind of research that needs to go in while writing a character, specifically a person of color. So but yeah, but you know, your book Willist, it's never specified what representation is in here. It still has a universal appeal to it. So I'm not sure how you achieved that, but would you want to share some insight?
Sure. Well, I imagine, for one thing, that 400 years in the future, that it would be it's not 100 years from the future, it would be very different than 400. I think in 400 we'd have a reshuffling of
Right.
racial boundaries that we're familiar with now and
Right.
our colorist expectations of people and things.
Right.
So I did in my mind, these were both sort of boys of color,
Okay.
but not with specific correlations to contemporary society. So
Right.
I didn't feel like I had to sort of get it right for what it would be like to live in Democratia, this made up country, you know, as a boy of color. So
Right.
I felt like I had permission to kind of just keep moving forward and not necessarily worry about that part of getting it right. But I did, yeah, there's only a couple of skin descriptions. There's Ambrose and one molten bronze skin.
Bronze skin, yeah.
And Kodiak says he has olive skin, which
Olive skin, yeah.
always surprised me as a description, because olives are many different colors.
Colors,
like
yeah.
olives, there's black olives, there's brown
Green
olives.
olives, yeah.
Yeah, right. He could be green.
Yeah.
So
then
then
it's confirmed that he's an alien if he's green.
Right. Yeah, he's a Martian after all.
Yeah.
This is the real plot twist. You're the only one to get it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until, so the cover designer, her name is Sarah Maxwell, and
Yeah.
she was the one. It's basically up to her. Like we said, put these boys in the cover. Here's the limited information I gave you.
Yeah.
What do you want to do? And she made the choices around skin tone.
Yes, please. I think we should all just take a minute to appreciate the beautiful art that is there on the cover. I think a lot of books sell because of its cover these days. As and this cover just stood out for me. I remember when Epic Reads did the cover reveal of it, and I saw it and I'm like, oh my god, I need to contact this author.
You wrote to me about a year ago.
Yeah, do you remember that? Like I almost wrote to you like a year ago, and I'm like, hey, do you mind if you can send me a copy of this book? And you were like, yeah, it's too early right now.
Like I'm still writing this book.
Yeah. So, on that note, Eliot, could you please tell us if you have considered or if you will potentially consider ever writing, a question that most authors get? Would you do a sequel?
Oh, I like that question because it means someone liked the first one enough that they want a second one. So it's a nice to think about. I actually was talking to my editor this morning,
Right.
And we talked about that very thing. I woke up a few months ago with an idea for what would happen in a sequel.
Yeah.
So it is, I think this idea of, okay, we have to raise, okay, spoilers again.
Okay, yeah.
But this idea of settling a new planet and being the future of humanity, and two boys and a bunch of, embryos.
Embryos.
How is that going to work out? Is it going to work out? Like I think it's a huge question to
It's a huge question. Yeah.
And so to answer that question in the second book would be really interesting to me.
Yeah.
And we'd have to make it in a way that would also be interesting to readers. But it's a
yeah.
little like, because this book does hinge on a big surprise.
Yeah.
The sequel would feel like it would have to. So I'd have to contend with the expectations of readers. Like, would they also need to have a twist, or could I just tell a more straightforward story?
Right. I think a part of writing sequels is that you need to have like enough conflicts in your head sorted out before you go ahead with the book. So yeah, that completely makes sense, on that respect. And I think I'll have to pick up the book once again, because this is not a question that was there on my list, but it just came along the way, and I think I need to ask this. So sorry. So we had embryos, as you said, in the future. And a lot of LGBTQIA couples, specifically, males, gay people, they want to have kids. And of course, adoption is amazing. We all should adopt, because there's so many people, so many kids who want homes. But then there's certain people who always look for, reproduction, because for some reason they like the idea of, creating their own skin and blood. So was it like, so when you were writing it, so was it like a nod to it in some ways, or was it just absolutely coincidental?
That's a great question. I did have the danger of, well, the problem to figure out of, if it's only two boys as astronauts and they're going to be the foundation of new humanity, like just the physics, like they can't have kids, right?
Yeah.
Easily on their own. So that had this, pod of embryos that they were going to populate the country with as a solution. It was also the problem of inbreeding, that like if they could actually have offspring, their offspring would have to be each other's partners to have more offspring. You have like a very small lineage. And so the embryos could be from all over the earth and lots of different genetic stock. But it was kind of a larger philosophical thing too. Like I know when I was a teenager and coming out, I really wanted sort of a radical re-envisioning, where I thought it would be cool if there was a story in which like queer people were superior. We were like X-Men, like we all had special powers and heteronormative people didn't. That would be like, that was a story I wanted to read. And
you should, in the, sorry for cutting in, you should definitely read The Extraordinaries by T.J. Klune.
Oh yeah, I haven't read it. Is it like that?
Yeah. It's a book about superheroes, and all these superheroes are cure people. So
Mm.
yeah, it's amazing. So your
Oh,
wish
okay.
is
I'll
fulfilled
read
then.
it. The book
Yeah,
exists. That's great.
yeah,
But I liked the idea of this kind of like radical gay future where,
right.
you know, people joke when they say that people shouldn't be gay. I don't know if this joke occurs in India or not, but they'll
It
say
does.
like it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve.
Right,
That it shouldn't be. It should be a man and a woman. Like that's the way nature wanted. And I
right.
love this idea of finishing a book where the ending is like the
Yeah,
foundation of humanity for this entire world will be
it's changed. Yeah,
queer. Yeah.
yeah,
Like that was
yeah.
important symbolism to me. It was like a radical re-envisioning of
Yeah,
human.
which is why, which is why when you mentioned, I thought that it's important to ask this question, because I realize that there has to be certain relevance to it. So Elliot, now the final question, where do you go from here? What book should we expect? Is it too early to reveal anything to us?
No, I'm actually just. We haven't announced it in print, but I am telling people about the next book, which is coming out a year from now. It's next June, and
Mhm.
it is a nonfiction YA. It's called Queer Ducks,
Okay.
and it's about there's been a huge explosion in research in the last 20 years into same-sex sexual behavior in animals,
Animals, yeah.
and yeah, and 1,500 different species with like
Yeah.
peer-reviewed scholarship around it. And so this book is looking at 10 different animal species and how it plays out in their world and kind of deconstructing our Noah's Ark version of nature that it's always male and female because there are animals that change sex and gender. There are male animals, couples, female couples, and triples. And, it's just looking
That's
at,
an
yeah.
that sounds like an insane amount of research. So so apart from writer, are you also do you hold some degrees, or are you like some sort of an animal expert?
So it was a lot of research, kind of just on my own for pleasure. But I am in the animal studies graduate
Okay.
program at New York University
Okay.
here in New York City. So it's part of it is I'm doing research through my coursework through that program as well,
Right. How
and
cool,
using the NYU
how
library. Yeah.
how cool would it be, to walk into your classroom where you're probably taking a class, and or you're sitting in, and people are like, oh, I go to class with this New York Times best-selling author. How many people can say that? Yeah.
I go more stealthy because usually people don't like someone who shows off, so I stay quiet.
Yeah.
just I'm just a student. Yeah.
Right. So on that note, I would just quickly like to, tell people that a very limited number of signed copies would be available with me. So you guys can, reach out if you want, and it's very exclusive. The book hasn't got Indian rights as of now. I mean, it will happen hopefully when once the paperback deal is signed, because for some reason India only gets paperbacks and not hardcovers. Yeah. Yeah, but you can still read it on Scribd. It's on Audible. The audiobook version is really amazing, even though you might find it a tad bit difficult to follow, but you will be able to. Yeah, but for others, those who want to support a little bit of cure kids here in India who are specifically struggling with COVID-19, Elliot wanted to come forward, completely his idea, and he said that he would want to send a very limited copies that he has with him, and all of that would be used to raise a very small fund, a very important fund rather, and that would all be sent off to an NGO here which deals with LGBTQIA kids. And I would first like to thank you, Elliot, for thinking about us, and for the country. We really had a tough time. It's way better now. I mean, I don't know how much is 1 lakh. I think it's 10,000 something. I'm very bad with maths. You might have understood by like that by now, because I hate science. So yeah, but then we were really bad, like back when the book released, but now we are still better. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for thinking of us.
Yeah, and thank you for having me on. It's been an amazing conversation, and you're such a engaged, bright reader of books. It's been really fun to talk to you about them.
Yeah, you know what? I really wanted to. I would close the session now. Like I'll stop the recording because otherwise it will stretch on a little bit. So thank you officially, Elliot, for being here. If you've not read the book, The Darkness Outside Us, please go ahead and do so. It is released, it's out in the market, it's doing really great. All my reviews are up on all my socials. Be sure to check that out. Be sure to follow Eliot because he loves animals, and anybody who loves animals and is pure is a great person to, be around with. So follow him, and be sure to check out his next works. I will be also talking about and putting up posters whenever the books arrive and whatever is the process thereafter. And